The doors of my corporate office opened and there he was, my high school tormentor, the one who made my teenage years a living hell. But today, he wasn't the same confident, popular kid he used to be. No, today he was sitting across from me, nervously shifting in his chair, as I reviewed his resume. I had to do a double take. Was this really happening? It had been years since I walked across that stage, finally leaving behind the years of ridicule, taunts, and insults. But some wounds don't heal as quickly as others, and some scars never fade. I never thought I'd have to see him again, but life works in mysterious ways. I had climbed the ladder of success, built my company from the ground up, and finally, I had a seat at the top. The last thing I expected was a knock on my office door, and an old face, one I hadn't seen in years. Turns out, he'd fallen from grace, and now he was begging for a job. Irony couldn't be more cruel. As I glanced at his application, it hit me. The guy who once humiliated me in front of everyone, the one who made my life a living nightmare, was now at my mercy. It was almost too good to be true. I remembered the way he used to laugh at my expense, how he had everyone on his side, and how I felt so small next to him. The power dynamic had shifted. But I had no idea how far this was going to go, or how I was going to handle it. "Mr. Callahan." I called out, my voice calm but sharp. "Come in." He stepped inside, nervously adjusting his tie. The same one he wore back in high school, but it seemed out of place now. He was no longer the arrogant teenager, instead, he looked older, weary, and desperate. I motioned for him to sit. He didn't recognize me at first, which made sense, why would he? But as soon as I spoke, I saw the realization hit him. His face flushed, and his eyes widened in shock. I smiled inwardly, watching him squirm. This wasn't just any job interview. This was personal. And I wasn't going to let him forget that. "Is this some sort of joke?" he asked, trying to hide his disbelief, his voice shaky. I leaned back in my chair, watching him fumble. "No joke, Mr. Callahan. You applied for this job, and now you're going to answer a few questions," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. His hands clenched into fists, but I wasn't going to let him intimidate me again. Not this time. Not ever. It wasn't just a typical interview. It was a test. A test of patience, dignity, and revenge. I had spent years climbing the corporate ladder, earning respect, and building something solid. Meanwhile, he had faltered. And now, he was begging for a chance to work in the very company I owned. I made sure to let him know that I wasn't doing him any favors. In fact, I was fully aware of his past behavior. He wasn't just being interviewed for his qualifications, he was being judged for what he had done to me and others in high school. His past had caught up with him, and there was no running away from it now. With every question I asked, I could see him struggle to regain his composure. His arrogance was gone. The confident, popular kid I had once known had crumbled, revealing someone who was terrified of rejection, who couldn't even answer simple questions about the job. I wasn't sure whether to feel sorry for him or relish in the sweet satisfaction of his downfall. The job he had applied for wasn't just any position. It was one that required leadership, intelligence, and a level of self-discipline he had never once shown in the past. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. If he wanted to work here, he had to earn it, not just through skills, but by proving he had changed. And I had no intention of letting him forget that. The real question was, how much had he changed? He wasn't the same person he had been back in high school, but could I trust him? Should I give him a chance or shut him down completely? That was the hardest part, deciding whether or not I wanted to be the bigger person. I wanted to, but there was still a part of me that wanted to see him suffer, to make him regret every cruel word he had ever said to me. But I wasn't going to make it obvious. Instead, I decided to turn the tables. I decided that if he wanted to work in my company, he would have to prove himself. And the first test would come the very next day when I assigned him a task he could never refuse. I watched him squirm through his first task. It wasn't difficult, but it wasn't easy either. I had assigned him a series of reports that required him to dig into the deepest parts of the company's operations. The kind of work that demanded precision, knowledge, and the ability to handle pressure. And that was when the cracks began to show. I checked in on him multiple times throughout the day, watching him stumble through everything. The more I watched, the more I realized just how far he had fallen. He wasn't even capable of following basic instructions without my guidance. My heart couldn't help but swell with satisfaction. This was exactly what he deserved. By the end of the day, his frustration was clear. He was having trouble with the simplest task. He called me into his office. I could see him sweating, desperately trying to put everything together, but he was failing miserably. "Why is this so difficult?" he muttered to himself, his face a mask of frustration. I stood in the doorway, watching him fail before my eyes. "Maybe this job isn't for you, Mr. Callahan," I said, walking into his office. "It requires more than just a resume." His face flushed as he looked up at me. "I know I can do this. I just need more time." I looked him in the eyes, holding my ground. "The only thing you need more of is humility." And with that, I walked out of the office, leaving him to face the reality of his failure. By the end of the week, I saw something different in him. A change. The arrogance, the cockiness, gone. Instead, I saw someone who had humbled himself. The man who used to bully me had finally accepted responsibility for his actions. I hadn't expected that. He came to me with an apology, not for the job he was failing at, but for the way he had treated me years ago. For the cruelty, the humiliation, the constant ridicule. I didn't know what to say at first. I didn't forgive him immediately. I wanted to, but I couldn't forget. What he did was unforgivable. But I saw something I hadn't seen before, genuine remorse. And that, to me, was more valuable than any apology. It was a form of redemption. And that's what I decided to offer him. I gave him the opportunity to prove himself at work, but more importantly, to prove he had truly changed. It wasn't easy for him, and I didn't make it easy. But it was the only way I could give him a chance. In the end, the power didn't belong to me alone. It wasn't about revenge, or getting even. It was about teaching a lesson, about redemption, responsibility, and growth. We all have our pasts, but it's how we deal with them that matters. As I watched him work, I realized that true revenge wasn't about making someone suffer. It was about giving them a chance to rise above their past mistakes. The real power was in forgiveness. Not because it was easy, but because it meant letting go. Mr. Callahan may never be the same person he once was, but the truth was, neither would I. I had learned that the greatest power is not in retaliation, but in how we choose to move forward. Whether or not he succeeded here didn't matter. What mattered was that we both had learned something, that true strength comes from redemption, and sometimes, the hardest thing to do is let go of the past.